Tonight's talk is one of a series of talks showcasing contemporary artists whose work is in the Art Institute's collection. Our guest is a painter, a sculptor, a printmaker, and an author, Eric Fischl. His 1983 painting, Slumber Party, is one of 44 iconic works recently gifted to the Art Institute by collectors Stefan Edlis and Gail Neeson. And it's hanging in our new contemporary galleries. If you haven't seen it yet, please make a point to go up and see the new installation of the contemporary galleries. Eric's work is in the Metropolitan and Whitney Museums and MoMA in New York. It's at the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA, and also in museums in Denmark and Paris and others. He grew up in the suburbs on Long Island. On his website, he adds, in quotes, "Against a backdrop of alcoholism and a country club culture obsessed with image over content." His family moved to Phoenix. He received his BFA from the California Institute of the Arts, and he moved to Chicago, where he worked as a guard at the MCA, Museum of Contemporary Art here. He also taught painting at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, and in 1978, he and painter April Gornick, his wife, moved back to New York. Today, they live on Long Island. Full circle. Eric Fischl first received attention in the early 1980s for depicting some of the disturbing undercurrents of mainstream American life. At the time, suburbia wasn't considered a legitimate genre for art, but he made waves with large figurative paintings of life in the suburbs and ambiguous sexually charged imagery. We're really honored to have him here with us to hear more about his art and his journey as an artist. Please welcome Eric Fischl back to Chicago.
Thank you, Fawn, for the intro. I told Fawn that I don't actually talk, I yammer. And so this is going to be a yammering thing. And anyway, what I thought I would do is start with the present and then sort of go back and investigate some of the things that have themes and preoccupations and stuff that have been in my work since the beginning. But I thought I would start at the most recent. I just opened a show of paintings in New York, so it's fresh on my mind. And I thought I'd start with this one, which is called Raft. And it's the most dramatic. In a way, it's kind of the culmination of a body of work I've been doing for the last 3-4 years, where scenes are set in art fairs, and it's a thing about, I think, and also in starting to have the conversation today. Let's see, where we're at, and then try to figure out how we got here. The art world, when I was just coming out of school, when I was being educated and when I was coming out of school, it was still called the art world, and now it's called the art market. So that's the trajectory that we've been on. It's an inescapable system for any artist with ambition, and yet it's something that is, not really, I don't think, a particularly healthy environment for the purposes of art and whatnot. So what you're seeing here in this diptych, and I'm sure you can see it's made up of 2 panels. It's actually a very large painting, not quite as big as this, but close. So it's quite dramatic that way, but it's slamming up against each other two realities that exist simultaneously, and neither one are inhabitable in the sense that you wouldn't choose to be in either one. The image of the art fair on the left is made up of the nudes are actually sculptures by the artist John D'Andrea. The paintings, the scribbles are by Christopher Wohl, and the blue and black painting in the background is a diptych of Warhol's car crash. And then set against that backdrop of, urgency or emptiness, empty gestural, empty, meaninglessness, or, the pleasures of the flesh are a group of people that seem inured to the point of inertia to it, so the art is not having much impact at all on it. That's set against one of the most horrific and dramatic struggles to survive, which is very current right now, obviously. And also it's so frightening, I think, that you don't want to stay there very long. So you find yourself in a kind of place of retreat from one thing to the other and back again. Anyway, I started the art fairs after I wrote a book, a memoir called Bad Boy, which is the title of my most famous, notorious painting from the 80s. And it's both a memoir, growing up and, how I became an artist, blah, blah, blah. And it's also it was an attempt to describe my creative process and allow an audience to kind of come in to see, how I make the things I make, the decisions that I make. So it's instructional on some level and a memoir narrative on the other. Anyway, I wanted to end it in like 1990, where I was at the height of my powers as a celebrity artist. And I didn't want to have to deal with the art world, the transformation that occurred beginning in the 90s, although I guess, my generation was initiating a lot of the things that transpired after that, but we didn't know it. But anyway, the publisher said, no, you got to bring it up to date. And so I did. I forced me to look at something. I'd never gone to art fairs, but after I had written the book, I thought, let's go and take a look and see what it really is like, which I did, and turns out it's not only is it a terrible place for art, it's in terms of it's like cows going to a slaughterhouse going, wow, this is where we're going to end up? Yeah, But at the same time, it actually, in terms of painting problems, has been incredibly stimulating. And irony of ironies, right? Part of it is that there's an irrationality to the space of an art fair. They're temporary spaces. They're like, they clash with each other. One art fair, like one booth, opens suddenly into another booth with an entirely different kind of work that seems to nullify the other one or compete in some way that's cacophonous and crazy and whatnot. and the temporariness of it, and so I found to be structurally interesting in terms of compositional things. So I began to really play around with that and kind of see if I could push the irrationality of the space as well as the humorous juxtapositions. And I also began to, first of all, I found it incredibly fun and interesting to paint other people's art. And I got a deeper appreciation in some cases for it, and in others, I was pleasantly surprised at how easy it was to do. And anyway, but I also began to mix sort of high art and middle tier art and sort of tchotchke art and things like that together, because I'm not clear that you can actually tell the difference. Certainly in my hand, the way I treat it, I'm not sure that the best seem to be the best and the worst seem to be the worst. So I don't know, but fun stuff. Anyway, as I was doing these paintings, which are all collages, right? I go to an art fair, I take a bunch of photographs, load them into the computer, in Photoshop, I cut and paste, and I recreate, I tell myself stories, and I put things together, both art-wise and people-wise, that seem to create some kind of, initiate some kind of narrative. What's going on here? Who are these people? There's also a thing I find compelling, which is that artists make art that projects outward, right? And every artist has a distance out from their object that they project, and that's their perimeter. That's where they trap their audience and lure them in to see the work in a more clear and intimate way. That's where they, the energy that pushes the other art out of the way, kind of thing. And it's as I said, every artist has their own distance out. Giorgio Morandi, it's 6 inches from the wall. If you see let's say an Edward Hopper painting, he comes and shakes your hand across the room, right? There's that kind of difference in the work. So, but it's that energy of pushing out that I'm fascinated by, because it creates a pressure as the artwork that I'm depicting is pushing forward towards the viewer, who is you and me, and we're pushing back as an audience. We push back. So what we're doing is ultimately sandwiching between our energies and our kind of needs to connect. People who don't seem to be paying a whole lot of attention to either of us, and I think that's a compelling and both ironic and sad truth. I think the purpose of all art is to connect. It's to connect in a way that goes, it goes deeply into the other. That is, it goes through a recognition, through empathy, through pleasure, through stimulation that is received in a healthy way. And any system that cuts that short, abbreviates it, I think loses what is necessary about art in a culture. Because what art does, where art is central to the culture, is that it depicts a world that we identify and that we connect to in a kind of glue way. It presents our kind of morals, our comedies, our tragedies, our sense of desire, need, things that are on a human scale, things that are social exchanges, in a way that reifies our sense of being with each other. So, and unfortunately, what the art fair does is more along the lines of speed dating. So it cuts it all short. You're not there to actually take the stuff in. You're there to recognize it. and recognition is something that is, you recognize things based on the hype that surrounds it, and not necessarily for its true value. I'm talking in a way that sounds like I'm presenting a kind of moral position here in a way, or chastising our time. But actually, it started out like that for me. It was like a way of saying, I'm going to show you. I have a lot of anger towards it. I'm going to show you. What has happened over the 4 years is that I recognize it's really a condition, and we're all a part of it. Those of us who are in the art world are all a part of it. It is our life. So it's not a finger-pointing thing. It's just it's kind of trying to find those moments that are the most poignant in terms of sort of depicting and capturing a sense of isolation, of disappointment, of again, of need, of something along those lines. As you can see in many of these, people are on their cell phones. Or they're distracted in a way. That media thing is something that actually has been in my work since the 80s. It's something, I think we have some pictures of that at some point, but I first started to paint sort of domestic scenes, and I was so afraid because I was working in a manner of painting that was so discredited. This kind of representationalism was so discredited in the 70s and 80s. Seen as very reactionary and stuff. That, by the way, I just want to say, I don't make any of the art up. Okay? So if you're looking at a cast plaster torso of a female with a cigarette coming out of her butt, I didn't make that up. That's a Sarah Lucas sculpture. Don't ask me why. Okay? Anyway, so I was saying that the thing about the, sort of representing the objects in work, in my pictures that are, televisions, telephones, Walkmans back in the 80s, cell phones now, etc., initially was a way of kind of dealing with not wanting to be mistaken for like Manet, right? It's like Well, if they're looking at a television, people will know this is not a Manet. This is somebody who loves Manet, maybe, but it's not Manet. Anyway, so the idea of trying to find a contemporary language for something that also, in terms of painting manner and stuff, was more rooted in history was very important to me. Here's an example of an early work that has a TV in it. The other thing is you're going to be able to date my paintings based on the media that's in them, right? So this is definitely not a flat screen, TV here. So we're way back. What's compelling me about the introduction of televisions into the narrative is, on one hand, it connects to a history of painting that goes way back, and the history of painting that goes way back is that part that included mirrors in their paintings. And you think of Velázquez as an example, Las Meninas, or you think of Van Eyck's Wedding of Arnolfini, or anyway, the introduction of a mirror into a painted scene was something that gave another sort of dimensional experience to what you were looking at, because it reflected things that were in the room that you couldn't see from the direction you were looking in. So you were more enveloped in the environment because of that. And not to mention that it also worked in a kind of metaphoric way, the way painting does as well, as a reflection on a reflection, etc. So there has been a long history of that kind of thing. Now, what happens when you introduce a television into that environment is fundamentally different, because it also expands the environment of the space that you're looking at. But it brings into the environment something that is arbitrary to what's going on inside the environment at that moment. It has nothing to do with what's going on. And as a painting problem, it's very interesting to sort of figure out what would be in the room, what would be something that wasn't, a comment, wasn't too arbitrary. It's like, how do you find the right sort of thing that goes on the television to sort of be there, not be there in that way. In a painting like this, not only is the television on, but she's also doubly removed in that she's on a telephone talking to somebody. So her auditory senses are in one place, and we have no idea where that is. Her visual ones are in another, which is some ad or movie on TV, and then of course physically she's in the kitchen. One of the things that has always interested me is environments, and the environments in which, like in this small painting here, this diptych here, where you have what appear to be either the same room or similar rooms that you're seeing simultaneously. It could be 2 rooms in a hotel, motel kind of thing. Or it could be the same room in a motel 2 different nights. And then you have 2 different activities that are fairly far apart. One is one of conjoining and one is isolated. And yet they're sort of within an environment that's, very much the same. This is, as I mentioned before, it's like a Walkman or something. So old. Anyway, this is one of the early paintings where, not necessarily the first one, but one of the early paintings where I included artwork as part of the environment that somehow had helped to kind of qualify the drama. In this case, the Warhol Marilyn Monroe's, iconic. Not only is a iconic Warhol, but Marilyn Monroe is iconic as a desirable woman, a goddess, a desirable object, and a strong female presence that's absent. This is Sleepwalker, which is, along with the next painting, the ones that kind of put me on the map. I didn't set out to do simply a sensational painting. I actually, within this painting, and it's in my book, so those of you who read it or will read it will see that I actually started off this painting only wanting to paint a bowl of fruit. And my journey to where this ended up was a long process that, I have to say, of all the paintings I've done, this journey was the most surprising to me. It kind of went the deepest and, was incredibly frustrating. And, as I was trying to get to something that I had no idea what it was, but seemed to have been evoked by the still life. So, anybody who x-rays this painting are going to see some very strange stuff underneath it, which is fine. This is the other painting that created a lot of attention, generated a lot of attention. This painting I actually did set out to make a sensational painting. This painting actually predates the Bad Boy, but and this was a painting where I, to set the context up. This is the late 70s. There's a lot of critique, a lot of discussion, a lot of strong feelings against painting in general, figurative art, and specifically that created within my generation an interesting and compelling divide between those who sought out images that were cliches and reasserted the cliche as a way of emptying out the work, versus those of us like myself who believed in the power of images and wanted to reassert their validity, their power, and so sought to find things that had a kind of truth to them, experiential, emotional, psychological truth. Now, a lot of people in my peers were looking to sensational imagery as a way of sort of inflaming the conversation. So they were looking at, pornography is one area that they were looking at, and I thought, hey, if they're doing that, I can paint a dirty picture too. And so I set out to do it, and a weird thing happened, which was by the time I finished it, I realized I hadn't painted a dirty picture. I just painted a real moment in a boy's life, and that had both a kind of clarity about adolescence, as well as a sort of metaphoric and symbolic kind of presentation of that. It was both. It hovered between those two spaces of real and symbolic realities, but when I looked at it, it was uncomfortable in that it was a private moment, but it wasn't a dirty moment, right? And that started me, to investigate a lot of the sort of areas of taboo in relationship to male identity and to starting with adolescence, pre-adolescence, and that became kind of my program moving forward. And to today is to follow, what it's like to be a boy, what it's like to become a man, what it's like to grow old, etc. And but essentially from the male perspective. Now I have to say about this painting that I was visiting my father and stepmother in Phoenix, my sister and her young children were also visiting. My nephew and niece were there. My wife April was there. We're sitting around the pool. My nephew, who's at that time was 10 years old, bored out of his mind, all of a sudden gets up with his squirt gun and unloads it in his mother's crotch. And I am looking at this thing going, oh my God, this is amazing. But the most amazing part of it was him turning to me and go, hey, Uncle Eric, you could paint this. I mean, to me, that not only was it funny and incredible that way, but it actually showed me that art works. That in fact, this is a kid who had looked at my paintings and understood where permissions lie, and also understood that that you actually had experiences in life that had meaning. And that you could be present in that moment of meaningfulness. I was stunned by it, and so of course I did a painting of it. But anyway, so as you can see, these early works were me trying to, sort of figure out that territory, the sort of coming of age, that trying to understand desire, trying to understand sexuality, and trying to understand appropriateness, appropriate feelings, trying to, sort of know where boundaries were. This is the painting that actually is upstairs or wherever we are. It's in the contemporary wing that Fawn referred to. It's not called The Pizza Eater. That I put that over another painting, so I apologize for that. It's called Slumber Party. And it's a painting where I was imagining a place where there was obviously a kind of a racial separation, not exactly clear what their relationship is. The room feels sort of like an attic type of room, and I personally was thinking about her in terms of being a housekeeper, nanny type of woman who's, and the boy is clearly in her room. And I say clearly because there are some things in there that aren't boys' toys. I was deliberately making a connection to African sculpture, and as a way of connecting her to that, and then in the background is some images of sort of stuffed toys, dolls kind of thing too. So again, a kind of female signifier, feminine signifier. Anyway, it's a scene in which you see this boy who's trying to kind of find himself, lose himself in the TV. Distracted, turning away from something that is obviously complicated for him, which is trying to figure out where he should be in relationship to this person, this woman, possibly a caretaker, naked or becoming naked, bedroom, etc., all the things resonating. You see a sleeping bag, so it's like, he's crashing there because that environment might be feeling safer to him, more comforting than his own room. But still there's this complex moment that's happening. The thing that I was going for with the African sculpture, which is a voodoo sculpture, that trying to animate it with light, where the shadows sort of crawl across the room, adds a kind of magical dimension to this moment. Something that tries to, or is taking, or seems to be controlling, almost like a puppeteer. Kind of, it seems to be controlling what's going on with the two people. I hope I didn't ruin it for you. But what I'd like you to walk away with is seeing that. For me, my paintings are journeys that I take, and I'm the first audience when they're done, and I pursue them. I don't know ahead of time what the painting is going to be. Now with Photoshop, I am closer to knowing what it's going to be than I was before, when I was only using snapshots and sort of collaging stuff together. But basically what I'm doing in my studio is talking to myself. I'm telling myself stories, and I'm searching for something that resonates on levels. I'm looking for surprises. I'm looking for aha kind of moments. And as I said, I don't know ahead of time. But I feel that when the painting is finished, it's locked into a set of relationships that is evocative, associative. It invites speculation. It's part of creating dramatic moments in painting, where you try to stop the moment. Where is that moment? I find the most sort of full moments are the ones that are either right before something happens or just after something happens. That is where meaning is the most present. If you stop it too soon, it loses its energy. If you stop it too late, the conclusion is fading and stuff. So there's like trying to find out where the hell that space is that would be the most dramatic in bringing a viewer into engagement. And in my most successful works, I've kind of found that precise place. The other thing is that you have to, when looking at any painting, you have to know that the artist made all the choices. Even if they came up with something that was an accident or a surprise, they chose to leave it. So everything is conscious in that regard. And an audience should consider that when looking at the work, that there's nothing in there that shouldn't be there, and why is it there? Here's an example of something where you're looking at this young girl on a bed holding very tightly her dog, right? And she's mostly naked. The painting's called Master Bedroom, and I think the sort of feeling of the place echoes that sense that this isn't a kid's room. So she's in an adult environment, and she's holding onto the dog, which for me is, there's security in that, protection possibly. Is this a dangerous situation? I don't know. Do you know? Is there something okay with what's going on? It's hard to see in the slide. It's hard to see from a distance. If you go up close to the painting, the smile that's on her face actually turns to a grimace, and her lipstick is smeared. But you don't know that from a distance. So again, there's that sense of, is this okay? Is this not okay? The dog doesn't seem to be particularly protective. He's comforting like a teddy bear, but he doesn't seem to be like alert in a way that he senses danger. So maybe it's not dangerous. But she's also not looking out at you. She's looking off to the side, and she's looking at where the light is coming from. So where is that? Is that a bathroom in a master bedroom? Is that a door that's just open into, is there somebody that's entering, leaving? All those things are at play. And then in the ashtray is a cigarette that is still slightly smoldering, right? So there's a presence. Again, is it a teenager smoking and trying to act an adult, or was there an adult in the room? In which case, what was going on? These are all things that I think are present within this moment that has been frozen. And of course, as you can see, they're not. The feelings are evoked. The trepidation, the concern, the uncertainty, things like that are evoked by the image, but you're not going to be able to answer the question. You don't know whether that what you're projecting onto it is the thing that is actually happening. And so you're left with your own sense of feelings about propriety, about boundaries, about exploration, about desire, things like that. Again, this is a diptych in which I'm exploring a similar environment with two different things going on in it. This, could be a balcony of a condo in Miami or on the beach. It could be the same condo 2 different times. It could be 2 different floors of the same condo. Again, you don't know that. What you do know is that there's 2 very different things taking place. One is again, a kind of isolation and attachment to, in this case, dogs that aren't necessarily going to reward you in the ways you're looking for. And then on the other is, young kids exploring the first sort of forays into sexuality. One thing that only very long looking would possibly trigger and might not ever trigger, but I'm going to tell you, is that you might notice that the two dogs and the two kids are painted the same colors. So the question is like, when the woman leaves, do the dogs turn into kids? Or when she comes home, are they turned into dogs? Anyway. Dogs are a lot of fun to paint. I almost think a painting without dogs is no painting at all. Even though I've done many that don't have dogs, I love painting dogs. And for me, they kind of represent they're not a nonverbal, an instinctual, intuitive, all they ask for is love. It's very direct. It's uncomplicated in that regard. So these paintings that I'm showing you now are, I began to sort of explore, trying to push the language of the painted object into another area where more sort of sculpture. I wanted to kind of bring the audience into the process of constructing meaning, constructing an image. And so they're on multiple panels that, go together, that both construct and deconstruct the seamless scene that's taking place. In some cases, like this one, the painting is cantilevered a little out from the wall. So if you're standing right in front of it, you get a kind of seamless sense that this is a room, the same, wall line, floor line is there from straight on. But the minute you move one side or the other, it breaks up. And in doing that breaking up, it sets up a different set of times signification. In this case, you're looking at what seems to be a mother and a daughter, and they're looking at, the mother is regarding the child, and the child is in probably one of the most awkward balletic poses. Imagine it's anything but ballet, right? She's kind of frozen and rigid and ungraceful. But what she seems to be doing is pushing back, which is a gesture I really responded to. So for me, the question was, is the mother trying to sort of move back into the time when she was that age, into her past, only to have the past shove her away? Or is it a thing where the child is trying to practice something and the mother's, lovingly engaging, watching her kid try to go through the motions? So I've got like a zillion slides here. And I actually have, this is the pizza eater, by the way. And I have long stories about most of them. So I don't know what our time is, although I think I've been rambling on for a while. But I would say, why don't I'll just keep flipping through these. But why don't we entertain some questions, if you have any, and we'll just have a conversation for a little while about it. Yeah.
The ones that you had with the dogs with the colors, and you went back to the children that were experimenting sexually on the balcony?
Dogs with...
Yes.
The
one on the left was the dogs? Uh-huh. The breed of the dog is the Basenji? Is that right?
Oh, those
not,
are Basenjis, and
yes.
I chose them because they can't bark.
Yes, I was going to say. So
I love the muteness of it.
Was there quietness?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Was there
right?
quietness?
This is what I mean by everything in the painting is specific and has purpose. I'm so glad you said that.
Was your quietness then related to the children or the children to the dogs?
Was the muteness?
Yeah, you found it just within each other.
I think it was possibly in both. The dogs were mute and the kids were also mute about what they're going through. So
That's what I was wondering. Thank you
yeah,
very much.
thank you. Anyone else? Yes, there's sure.
I read your book,
Thank you.
so I sort of have a background of what's going on here.
What the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah. And the art scene that's on us today, can you comment the Art Basel and the Frieze in New York, and do you see a direction where the art world is going, and how are your paintings selling, and do you have any feedback on that?
Okay. I can't predict the future. So it's hard to answer that. In terms of, are my paintings selling? Yes, my paintings are selling. Thank you very much for asking. But in terms of the system that you're talking about, I don't know. It feels to me like we're in a place where all the artists and the art world, the people that make up the art world, from museums on down to the artists, are have in various ways abnegated responsibility for the condition that is present with us now. That it's become increasingly insular as well as privileged. It's things that don't necessarily talk to a broader audience about things that are meaningful in their lives. It seems like it's a lot of the artwork that is the most sort of exciting for both the collecting public and a sort of media magazine public are works that they have a huge wow factor to them, right? They're like you first see them and it's like, holy shit, look at how many blinking lights are on this thing, or I can't believe I've never seen a blown up teddy bear that big. It's like there's that sense of wow. There's like things are so shiny, right? And stuff. So it has this quality of they're using just. The model is manufacturing. They're using manufactured objects that have a high degree of execution to them. They're perfect, right? And they also are, sort of blow your mind because of the scale at which you confront them. They're so big that they have this sort of almost Disney World kind of grandeur to them. But they're also, to some extent, short-lived as experiences, and so I don't know. There seems like the market, it just keeps finding more and more people to produce it, and there are really good artists out there that know exactly how to do that. So where's it going to go? I have no idea. If the public says I don't want this anymore, then artists will stop doing it. Except for those who, are comfortable with a much smaller audience, or are comfortable with just making tons of dough. But in terms of the thing of it, actually artists would kill me for saying this, but I think where we could go, which would be interesting, complicated but interesting, would be more like the old model of like the de Medicis or the Catholic Church or something, where you have power asking talent to portray things that they want portrayed, to actually specifically say, I want you to make this, whatever it is. And where it gets complicated is if the power doesn't know what they want, right? Which is where we're at now. The power just buys what artists make, and they get excited about the more, sort of wow artists, whatever. But, if I don't know if any of you have seen Hamilton, for example. To me, that's the direction we have to go in. That's the most amazing event, theatrical musical event that it changed the whole paradigm. And it did it in this incredible way because it's both, a kind of common language, street language, hip hop, rap type thing, whatever, and an incredibly intelligent reinterpretation of history. That is a history we're all connected to, a part of, and whatever. And it was such a learning experience within the framework of amazing entertainment, right? And it was something that, this was self-motivated by Lin-Manuel Miranda, as far as I know. So it's not the model that I'm actually setting up, but imagine power coming to an artist saying, I want to do a series that reinterprets an aspect of American history, for example. And I'm coming to you because your work can handle that. I want it to be something that would become a public situation. It would become a certain scale. It would be, blah, blah, blah. Then you would find the artists would be responding to that. Their creative thing would be pulled into an engagement with something that was so meaningful to more than just themselves that I think it would be a really exciting time. And, we're coming out of a time when modernism, it's played out. Modernism changed the paradigm back in the turn of the 19th century when it moved from speaking from the general to attract the individuals. That you could see in the general, the universal, the individual self. It shifted it to where you sought and expressed the individual in a way that had a universality to it, right? And so we pursue that sort of continually mining the individuality to the point where it becomes absurd, where it becomes a thing of like, it's not actually universal at all, it's idiosyncratic. It's like, it's more like you're just watching your kids play and they're not paying any attention to you. They're just in there playing with themselves, right? It's that kind of thing. You're peering in. There's a lot of art that feels that way, like you're just peering into kids being kids. And I think that's got to come to an end. That's played out. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel on that. So what is there then? What there is what's really important to us all, which are the real dramas of our lives, the real meanings, the fullness of our lives, the fact that we feel love, we feel pain, we feel desire, fear, you name it, and we feel, we bond, we break, we reconnect, all of those things, and those are the stories of our lives, and so aren't we looking for people to tell us those stories, good storytellers to tell us those stories? So follow me. Anybody else have a?
I had two, I guess, simple questions. One is, where is your exhibition that you have right now? I believe you mentioned the art fair series. Some of it is being displayed. And the second one is, I'm not familiar with your book. What is it called?
Thank you. The book is called Bad Boy, and the subtitle is My Life on and Off the Canvas. And my show is at Pear Skarstead in New York on 79th and Madison. And it just opened last week, so it'll be up for a while.
Yes, so my question was, could you name one or two artists who are making work today whose work is speaking to you at this time?
There's actually, I have lots of artists whose work speaks to me. It's a tough question because it sounds like, the first two names would be my favorites or something like that, as opposed to just two names that pop to mind or whatnot. I actually have a lot of, I have like Catholic taste. I like a lot of different kinds of art. But let's see. I was just recently saw a show of David Hammond. It's in New York right now, whose work I wasn't familiar with, and I was familiar more with his name and some reproductions of work, but didn't really have a sense of what his work was. And he's an object maker dealing with black identity, with his own personal kind of quest for identity and stuff through these objects that are, some of them feel, speedily put together. They're clever. They're funny. They're fantastic, beautiful. It's a variety of things. I was really impressed with that show. Painters. I went to school with David Sally and Ross Bleckner. They're two painters whose work I greatly admire. I admire my wife's painting. She to me is the most brave of us all because she paints landscapes, and landscapes are on the low end of the genre totem pole, and she's managed to revive this genre by creating these paintings that are powerful. They're not about landscape, they're about place. They're about environment and power and weather as force that are sort of spiritual and psychological at the same time. So she's taught me a lot about seeing the world. What you want, I think, from artists, and especially I think, or specifically I can talk to painting, you want them to show you something that when you turn around and leave, you see it elsewhere. You want the object to somehow have formed a language for you to actually perceive the thing that you're perceiving, that you experience as you walk down the street or whatnot. I mean, a simple example of that is in my show that's up now, which are scenes from art fairs. You're at the opening, and I'm watching people who are engaged in seeing the work. They're also incredibly self-conscious because they've got their cell phones in their hand and they've just been texting and going, putting it away, or somehow noticing that, this is what we look like. This is us now. And that's on a very simplistic level. So what you want is from art is you want to recognize something in there that when you leave, you recognize elsewhere. And There's other artists that I like. Well, there's two kinds of painters. I love to make generalizations. There's two kinds of painters. There's a painter that, like Jackson Pollock, like Rubens, like Julian Schnabel, say, three examples, where their work is about being in the presence of authentic energy. You're there, you feel it, it's masterfully done. When you leave, the work kind of all blends together. You kind of can't remember where the blue drip in this was versus, this, was it in that painting or that painting? Was the horse rearing in the middle of this, or was it twisted that way? Or, they just blend together because it's energy. And you're there and you're experiencing the energy. That's your thing. The other are the artists that seek to, am I going backwards? I think I am, right? Sorry about that. You want to see them again? Sorry. I'm going backwards all the way, so forget it. I'm going to stop with the show. But anyway, the other artists are the ones where you see their image and it burns on your retina. And when you leave, you can remember everything about it. Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, great example of that. You see it and it just stays with you. His Lighthouse, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the two kinds of artists, two kinds of painters. And, some, the ones that have a kind of expressive emotionality to it, you get carried up in if they're good, the authenticity of their feelings. And in the other ones, you have a relationship that's more on a psychological level, I think, more something where the feelings evoked by an image of something, become a symbolic reality for you in some way. So, I want to entertain a question. Well, there's somebody way in the back there. Let me get this straight. You're asking me if I've painted obese people?
You really don't seem to. You paint elderly people, but not really obese people.
Right.
Is this just to simplify your storytelling, or is it simply because we love beauty?
Or because I'm not Lucian Freud.
But this is not our real society in everything that you paint.
My language of depiction is very narrow. And I found early on, I found that my strength was in really dealing with what I know, right? And so it's a narrow language. I deal with a certain class of people, a certain kind of background, a certain kind of environment, a certain kind of milieu. I deal with, predominantly a white world. I deal with, in a relationship, family relationship. It's the language of description is pretty narrow, and so. The question of why not obese people is just they're not a part of my world, so I don't really think about them that way. What I'm sensitive to is trying to use something that would be hypercritical or perceived as hypercritical or perceived as sensational in the most simplistic way. Something that, I just, anyway, it never has come up, so I don't. Do you think I should? Because I will if you want me to.
I have a question up here up front. As I look at the slides, there's such a variety and such a range of individuals and figures in these pictures, and the scenes and the settings as well. And I'm wondering a little bit about how you kind of put together the situations or the settings or the circumstances and the figures who are then in those images. Do you tend to start with an idea or a setting of here's a place or a moment where I want to put some people, and then find the models or the characters that you want to put there, or do you start with characters and models and figures and think this person is or these people are people that I want to see in this kind of a moment?
Well, all of those things are possible. Generally, I start with people, and I as I said, I take a lot of photographs wherever I go. What I found with photography, and I'm not a photographer, I'm a snap shooter. But what I found is that because well, first of all, what I find is that I'm wandering around and I see something, and if I linger on it, it means something to me that I don't know why, right? Somebody's doing something and standing and bending, twisting, turning, moving in some way that I find compelling, but I don't know why. If I have my camera, I take a picture of it. Now, later on, I go to, now, as I said, I use Photoshop, so I put them into Photoshop. Now I'm going through looking for something to paint. I come across this figure doing this thing, and the same thing happens to me. I'm looking at going, what is that person doing? Why are they doing that? Would it illuminate my feeling if I, instead of having them doing this in front of the car that they were doing it in front of when I took the photograph, what if I moved them into a kitchen? Would that amplify or illuminate my reaction to it? Would that trigger feelings and memories and stuff like that? And so it's about that. It's like I just kind of find it. No, it's not a kitchen. What was it? A patio? Is it a shopping center? Is it a beach? It's like, where's an environment in which this action becomes a sort of an evocation, right? And then it's like, are they by themselves? Are they with somebody else? Are they turning away from or turning towards somebody? Who's come into the room? Who's come into that moment? Is it an animal? Is it something on the television? Is it a sound? What is it that's triggering that thing? And what I found from what photography has given me is that it slices our moments so thinly that everybody in a photograph is off balance, right? They're in the process of becoming something else. They're starting to move. They're starting to sag. They're starting to turn. The movements are small, but they're perceptible. And that, you need that to create a drama. You need motion. That's why, you look at academic painting where they're all standing around, it's just as dead as can be, right? It's not real drama, it's symbolic, blah, blah, blah. But for real drama, you actually have to have motion. And so that's what these figures do. They're beginning to do something, and then you just go with that. Where are they going? What's going on? And then try to figure out everything else around it, and where to stop it. So. Anyway, thank you
Fischl,
very much.
Back to Chicago.